This is Bloomberg Crypto, a daily Bloomberg iHeart podcast, and I'm Stacey Marie Ishmael, managing editor of crypto for Bloomberg News. It's Tuesday, November 1st. About a year ago, Nigeria introduced a digital version of its official currency, the naira. The introduction of the so-called e-naira was partly a response to concerns that the rising popularity of crypto in the country was going to threaten the banking system. Now, there are a few countries experimenting with their own versions of digital money, including the Central African Republic, which we've talked about on this show, China, Jamaica, the Bahamas, and various islands in the Eastern Caribbean. Other countries, including where I am in the United States, are in the studying and thinking deep thoughts about feasibility phase of things. So how's it going for Nigeria and the e-naira? Let's ask Bloomberg reporter Ruth Olurounbi.
It's been 1 year and only 0.5% of the population is using the e-naira.
And Bloomberg Nigeria bureau chief Anthony Osae-Brown.
Usability is key. And right now, the usability argument is very little for the digital currencies.
One of the topics that we cover a lot on this podcast is obviously digital assets. And, within digital assets, certainly crypto. Crypto's in the name. This is the Bloomberg Crypto Podcast. But we've also talked about something called central bank digital currencies, which is the idea of governments themselves issuing a kind of digital cash. Can you all talk a little bit more about what the Nigerian experiment with digital money has been like?
Okay, so the Nigerian Central Bank launched a digital currency about a year ago when the central bank decided that it needed a form of an alternative to the naira. And that was interestingly after asking financial institutions not to honor crypto transactions. It felt it needed an alternative to crypto transactions. So it launched the e-naira to sort of replace crypto. And so that's what the central bank has been doing for some time now. And interestingly, the currency has not picked up, possibly as much as the central bank hoped it would. Since then, they've had about 1 million people downloading the e-naira.
What percentage of the population is actually using this thing? It's about 0.5% of the population is currently using the e-naira. The rate of adoption has been slow, and that's mostly because people are not trusting the government's e-naira, given its stance against cryptocurrency, and mostly because many people also don't know about what e-naira is.
So you've got a country with a population of more than, say, 200 million. The government didn't exactly ban crypto, but the central bank made it pretty clear that it didn't approve and issued some sternly worded letters to other financial institutions. And they come out with this e-naira. And, according to your reporting, one of the reasons for that was try to encourage people who live in Nigeria but didn't have a bank account. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's relatively correct. The Nigerian population, about 45% of all adults have no bank accounts. And so the central bank thought it to be the e-naira. Well, if 45% of the people don't have a bank account, but we have at least 150 million mobile subscribers. At least 81% of the population have the phones. Mm-hmm. So the central bank felt the phone could be a good leverage to drive financial inclusion by creating an e-naira, which you can basically use your phone to access and pay for services through that platform. So that was the idea, to increase financial inclusion by leveraging mobile telecommunications.
But it doesn't sound like that's what's happening.
there's been a lot of challenges. Awareness is there. And as Ruth said, there's also some level of suspicion, some level of lack of trust in the central bank. And then basically affordability in the sense that, yeah, everybody uses a phone, but not necessarily everybody that uses a phone can afford to load a phone with e-naira. So that has been also a challenge. And a lot of people are just like indifferent about the e-naira. Usability is a big issue. Most people who have phones are already used to using their banking apps and alternatives from the banking sector.
And also, if you consider that internet penetration in Nigeria is less than 50%, and you need internet to use the e-naira, so that could also be a reason for why adoption is very low in Nigeria.
Ruth, what has the government been doing to try to drive adoption?
So currently, the government is trying to target the transportation sector and specifically the tricycle operators. And my guess is that the government is targeting them because they're everywhere, both in the rural area and the urban area. I live in Abuja, and the tricycle is one of the biggest means of transportation here in the capital city.
So I'm going to ask I have clearly never been to Nigeria question. When I hear tricycle, I think of like bike with 3 wheels. When you say tricycle, what do you mean?
Yes, bike with 3 wheels. Think Hollywood movies, think India, Hollywood movies. And if you go to any rural area in Nigeria, you will find them. So it makes sense that these tricycles would be government's focus for driving adoption.
I'm learning so much right now. So, Anthony, Ruth, you've both been reporting on Nigeria financial system for a long time. We have interviewed some folks who have written about what's been happening to the attempts by the Central African Republic to launch its own digital currency, as well as, they've been trying to follow El Salvador in adopting Bitcoin. We've talked on this podcast about the fact that lots of other countries are thinking about doing digital currencies of their own with mostly mixed results, right? Like some of them, including the US, are like, we're trying to figure this out. Some of them, like China, are like, we can make you use this. So there's a lot of range in terms of the success of adoption. With the latest attempts by the Nigerian government to drive people to use this e-naira, are you starting to see any results, or is this still a case of like in a year from now, it's still going to be a tiny fraction of the population?
That's difficult to say. The central bank is quite optimistic. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it depends on what happens going forward. We're likely to see, people have suggested that the government intervenes by, for example, paying half salaries or salaries below a certain range in e-naira. If the government takes such an action, then we are likely to see a high take-up rate in the e-naira. So it depends on what actions the central bank or the government takes going forward to compel usage of the e-naira. And if that happens, then we'll see a significant difference. But if that doesn't happen, then there's still going to be huge resistance in the take-up rate for the e-naira.
It also sounds, there's a quote in your story from one of the drivers of these motorized tricycles, which is, why is the government asking us to collect e-naira? I thought the government said cryptocurrency is bad. And I thought that was so interesting because it's like it can be hard to explain to somebody how this is different from them using Bitcoin on their phones. How is the government trying to help people understand the difference? Is the government trying to help people understand the difference?
The government has just said that this is different from cryptocurrency. Mm-hmm. That's it. So most people, I can't explain to you how different this is to cryptocurrency. And, if the government if the central bank that is introducing the e-naira is not communicating well with us, telling us how different this is to other forms of digital currency out there, then I think that's a problem.
I would never describe myself as a copywriter, but I do think it's been helpful for me to think about the difference here as, and there are going to be people who are going to write me angry emails about that. Feel free, crypto@bloomberg.net. But what I'm going to say is that, digital currencies like the e-naira are like crypto issued by a government, right? Whereas tokens like Bitcoin, Ether, Dogecoin are things for which there is no central bank-like entity.
Someone described them as private currencies.
Private currencies. So
there's government currency and private digital currency.
Indeed. And so, I think these sorts of distinctions might not matter to the person on the other end of a transaction, but governments get really fussed about them because, as you said at the beginning, one of the concerns that governments often have is the stability of their own banking systems. And, various regulators around the world, not just in Nigeria, have definitely expressed concerns that cryptocurrencies could pose some kind of threat, real or perceived, to the financial system.
Yeah, like banks, commercial lenders here have been very slow in pushing or creating awareness for the e-naira because there's no incentive for them to do that. Cash taken on the out of the banks and put on an e-naira wallet is not counted as cash on the books of the banks.
This is a really, really important point. And I think it's something that a lot of people don't necessarily pay attention to, which is that banks themselves are not huge fans by default of this kind of digital money for the exact reason that you're describing, which is they don't necessarily have the ability to make money on digital money, right? Because it's like when you're borrowing, if you have one e-naira, that's a claim directly on the Nigerian central bank.
Central bank, yeah.
Exactly.
That's it, exactly. And not a claim on them. And meanwhile, they mobilize that deposit at a cost.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically they are losing by you creating an e-naira wallet on their account.
We'll be right back with more from Bloomberg's Ruth Olurounbi and Anthony Osae-Brown. If you have somebody who's listening to this podcast and they're like, wow, this is interesting, I'd never thought about that this way. What is one key thing for each of you think somebody should really take away from, your reporting?
Yeah, I think a key thing is, for me, is the fact that this experiment needs some form of intervention to make it gain traction. And so far, that intervention is not coming. And that until we get that intervention, digital currency usage, for example, in Nigeria is going to be a dream. And the awareness is not just going to... Usability is key. And right now, the usability argument is very little for the digital currency. So for anyone launching a digital currency, you have to think of the usability question and answer it before you introduce it. Once you don't create that question, once you don't answer that question, then most likely you're not likely to make any impact.
Got it. And Ruth, what about you?
For me, I would say that you also need to invest in educating the public what your product is about. Obviously, if you're bringing out a product, you've seen a gap in the market. But if you're not educating the public, the market, if you're not telling them why they need to use this and why it's good for them, the rate of adoption of e-naira is going to remain low. It's been 1 year and only 0.5% of the population is using the e-naira. So if you're not giving out banger campaigns, you're not telling people about it and why they need to use it, we probably will come back next year and still talk about this.
Well, you are welcome back on the podcast next year or anytime before that. Thank you both. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you, Anthony, for joining me today. You can find more of Anthony Osae-Brown and Ruth Olurounbi's reporting on the Bloomberg terminal, on Bloomberg.com, or follow them on Twitter. Ruth is at Olurounbi, that's Olurounbi, and Anthony is at Osae-B. On the next episode of Bloomberg Crypto, is Bitcoin boring now? That's the current meme/complaint among a certain kind of crypto enthusiast, and it reflects the recent very tight trading range for the largest digital token. How are traders responding to Bitcoin's relative absence of volatility? We'll discuss tomorrow. This is Bloomberg Crypto, a daily podcast from Bloomberg and iHeartRadio. For more shows from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Send us your comments, questions, or suggestions for the show to crypto@bloomberg.net, or find us on Twitter, we're @crypto. The supervising producer of Bloomberg Crypto is Vicky Vergolina. Our senior producer is Janet Babin. Our producers are Mohammed Farouk and Sharon Barrero. Our associate producers are Ty Butler and Moses Undum. Desta Wonderad is our engineer. Original music by Leo Sidran. I'm Stacey Marie Ishmael. We'll be back tomorrow.